Who is the serial killer that might be Carnage's new host? So in the last issue of Eddie Brought Carnage, Bushwhacker, who has the ability to turn his body into any kind of weapon he wants, murdered an entire police station full of officers after Eddie exposed him for faking his identity and pretending to be a cop so he could torture low-level criminals that were booked at his station. And this issue picks up right where we left off, with Bushwhacker standing above all of his victims' bodies while looking into Eddie's eyes with a sinister smile on his face. At first, Eddie was so shocked that he completely froze up. He couldn't wrap his head around how somebody could be so ruthless, but eventually he was able to spit something out and ask Bushwhacker why he did this. And unfortunately, Bushwhacker refused to reveal his motives, stating that his time as a cop has allowed him to see that most criminals are stupid and end up getting caught, but the ones who didn't get caught didn't leave any witnesses, which meant that he had no other choice but to take Eddie's life. After that, Bushwhacker began spraying Eddie and Carnage down with his weird skin flesh machine guns, and Carnage absorbed so many shots that Eddie began to worry about his condition, because if Carnage died, then obviously he was gonna die as well. However, moments later when Bushwhacker ran out of ammo, it seemed like they were gonna be okay because he didn't have anything to defend himself with anymore. But to their disappointment, Bushwhacker knew the police station like the back of his hand and immediately made a break for a nearby vault to trap himself inside. And at first this was a bit confusing because he could only hide in there for so long until Carnage forced his way in, but it turns out that this was actually the ammunition vault, and there was so much firepower inside that he was able to transform into a giant hulking monster after stuffing everything down his throat. And immediately upon doing so, he tried snuffing Eddie out with fire by turning one of his hands into a giant flamethrower. But while dodging all the flames, Carnage expressed that this was a big mistake because Bushwhacker was in fact so big that he couldn't even get out of the vault, which allowed them to latch onto Bushwhacker's back, place their hands on the sides of his head, and then crush it with so much force that it literally exploded. Now later on, after checking into a nearby motel, Eddie confronted Carnage about the plane incident once again, demanding that he tell him what he did with them or he was gonna end both of their lives immediately. And so Carnage finally revealed that all of them are still alive in a so-called safe place, and they were gonna stay in that place until he decided to do something else with them or do something to them. The only reason he was keeping them alive though was for leverage, because he theorized that if his only way to get Eddie to do what he wanted was by threatening his life, eventually he might hate himself enough to just let him do it. But if he said he was gonna kill other people, then Eddie's conscience would feel way too guilty to deny Carnage's wishes. Anyways, after that, the story jumps over to a lady named Bailey Bushkin, and Bailey is the person who's been finding leads on murderers for Eddie because she runs a podcast centered around crime cases, and she tried calling Eddie over and over again to tell him about her next lead, but Eddie happened to be asleep, so she left him a voicemail. And a voicemail saying that, hey look, everybody thought this guy died in New York a few years ago, but if the files in Bushwhacker's flash drives were correct, MUSE is still alive. So it looks like MUSE is gonna be the next serial killer that Carnage and Eddie go after. But sadly, that's when this issue comes to an end, but if you guys wanna see what happens next, let me know in the comments down below.